So much, Simin, and all our dear colleagues from RC47 and guests. Today, I will be touching a word on how the living memory of the streets in Chile have been able to challenge authoritarian legacies and impunity, and what we call anti-social conflicts democracy, which was until recently the model democracy in Chile, and which is being challenged and producing a lot of tensions, as we have seen with the great difficulties that our colleagues in Chile are experiencing today with the commemorations of the September 11. Much polarization, many tensions, many unfortunate declarations from the right wing against the memory of Salvador Allende and all the victims. So it's a very hard time, but I'm going to, I have a hypothesis about this hard time and why it is so difficult right now. And there may be something positive. I hope my colleagues can add on that. So I guess the interesting thing is that there has been in Chile, and there are still, many struggles for the legitimacy of Salvador Allende's legacy and the popular unity's legacy. Why is it so difficult to celebrate, as you said, Simon, a democratically elected socialist government, which was a model which bring a lot of hope at that time? There are two main reasons why the rehabilitation of the UP's legacy is difficult. It is because it challenges, in my view and Ricardo's view, two main authoritarian legacies in Chile. The first one is impunity for past human rights violations. I will touch more on that in one moment. And the second one is Chile's political elite's choice of a stable democracy model, which was brought in and included the exclusion of social conflicts. For 2 decades, Salvador Allende and the UP government were depicted as being responsible for the political crisis that led to what the military called the breakdown of democracy, in very soft words about this terrible coup. So it is interesting to see that it is the Unidad Popular and Salvador Allende who are seen, including in political science. We see that a lot, saying, well, if these people hadn't opened so much channels for popular demands, there wouldn't have been a political crisis, economic crisis, which is part of a myth. And there would have been no need for the military to intervene. So you can see here the very hard and heavy guilt that is put upon the Salvador Allende's shoulder. So this is precisely why recent movements that I will touch on in a minute have been challenging a legacy of impunity and reconciliation, imposed reconciliation from the dictatorship. We have to remember that Chile's current constitution includes amnesty for human rights violations committed during the dictatorship as a requirement for reconciliation. Even though there were 2 truth commissions, the Retic and Informe Valet, versus the possibility of persecutions for human rights, some cases like sexual human rights violations were excluded even from these truth commission. And also the truth that was included in the Valek report is buried under the Museum of Memory. The Bari government just announced that they will try to propose to reopen the archives, but they need the parliament to vote for that. But it's interesting. So it's only the persistence of a huge social movement, which started with the general strike in 2003 for justice, and which united very varied social actors and human rights defenders, as well as a process of memory from below that allowed very important changes for human rights, especially since 2017. So the relentless efforts of families of victims and advocacy networks has been able to make changes in the international law for example, forced disappearance as a permanent crime and allowed it for some trials to be held in Chile. This is why right now we have 246 retired militaries or secret intelligence officers who are currently convicted for crimes against humanities, mostly in the last 5 years. So this is a very interesting development, but nevertheless, amnesty is still a part of Chile's constitution, and we have to remember that. So why did Allende, I'm trying to hide this because I can't see very well, sorry, and the Unidad Popular government ended up as being blamed for the dictatorship? Well, this is what Barahona de Brito calls the victim blaming narrative, and I have, sorry for the publicity, I have expended a lot on that in my and it is a legitimizing discourse from the military, which is adopted by both right-wing and center-left political elites at the beginning of the transition, and which legitimizes the amnesty laws as well as repressed social movements because they are seen as having caused, actually, the political crisis leading to the dictatorship. So this is a very heavy burden, which is why we see so many tensions about the commemorations right now. So the victim blaming narratives was used constantly since the beginning of the transition. Of course, right now with the Boric government, it's a whole new situation. But for example, during the Piñera's government, we can see it in this declaration. Well, he says that he's absolutely convinced that if Chile goes down the path of violence and Molotov bombs, which means protests, well, which will not lead to anything good because we've been down that road before and it has led us to the breakdown of democracy. So you can see the accusation towards protests and social movements as being something that will lead to the breakdown of democracy. Of course, we have many expressions of unreconciled memory. The streets in Chile had called for the truth. Here you see the commemoration of the assassination of 3 young pobladores from very poor neighborhoods, which we call poblaciones in Chile. These are only a few examples. But what is interesting is that because of the perseverance of victims association and social movements as a whole, I will touch on the importance of the student social movements, which Carla also explained to us in one moment. But there was a change, a social change, and after a few decades, Chile's model democracy, stable democracy, was beginning to be seen by its people as a post-dictatorship, not a full democracy, but a post, something that still had many authoritarian legacies. And so it was because of numerous social sectors who united to shed light on impunity and the need for Chile to make a clear break from its authoritarian past in order to achieve a genuine democracy. Here you have a picture from the dictatorship where people very bravely denounced torture, and you can see it in the 2019 Estallido Social, of which Carla talked about, and where people, you see the same iconography. So the justice movement, I'll just go a little bit quicker, took many forms. The FUNAs, which are very important in Chile, direct denunciations of human rights violations, which were not punished because of the amnesty law. And what is important for us today is that there was a massification of protests against impunity and a social construction of memory, which have led to the social rehabilitation of Allende's figure. This is very important. This happened in the decade of the 2010s. And so we can see here the picture of our dear President Salvador Allende. And of course, this banner which says, "We are living the results." So student movement and massive strikes have played a key role in rehabilitating the Unidad Popular's model of democracy versus post-dictatorship. We can see that all these are students' movements actions. But of course, we see here Salvador Allende, who is very present. And there was a burst of cultural activities bringing Allende and his famous Unidad Popular glasses, the big, heavy, dark glasses, who were back in the streets of Chile. They were excluded. Allende's, the picturing Allende and putting his glasses in front of an important street was not something that could have been done without the movement for justice. And of course, we can see how the Unidad Popular's aesthetic and symbolic demands has been also very important, especially in the student movement, but not exclusively. Uniting past and present with the revendication of the claim for the nationalization of copper. So where we see this recent, it was during the 2018 Estallido Social, we can see the claim for the nationalization of copper. And here, of course, we can see the old pictures from the Unidad Popular. So there's a clear intention of uniting, of, building or creating a continuity. So the rehabilitation of Allende's model of democracy versus the post-dictatorship, which has been imposed in many Chileans' views after the transition to democracy. So this model of democracy and economy has been key to the growing demand for a constituent assembly in Chile. And so it is very important to see that during the 2019 uprising, there was really an opportunity to massively circulate growing struggles for justice, and it contributed very, very strongly to the rehabilitation of Allende's legacy by exposing ongoing state terror practices inherited from the dictatorship. And here I have to really say a word about the political sexual violence, which is a concept that was created by victims of these kind of terrible human rights violations, sexual human rights violations during the dictatorship, especially in a clandestine torture center, which is called Venda Sexy. And the survivors from this center have taken the reality that they have lived and shared it with the society. And many, many young women have come to say that this is an ongoing practice. In demonstrations, journalists, demonstrators, young women, LGBTQ plus members are taking a side, and they are victims of political sexual violence. In Chile, at least during the Estallido, there were near 300 cases that were documented. And so this was a very important...
Oh, you zoom fan.
Is everything okay?
I think there are some people trying to disturb, so I'm going to remove them, okay?
Thank you. You tell me when it's okay to continue, okay? This is a testimony to the tensions we were speaking about in Chile, I guess. So, of course, you all know about this very important choreography performance from El Colectivo Las Tesis, which has gone around the world. And this is important because in this choreography, there's a part where the state and state violence and past state violence is really put forward, so people can see that there is still sexual state violence going on in Chile. There has been since the dictatorship. The oppressive state is still there. I translated the best I could from Spanish. And so this was a very important part also of rehabilitating what, the inheritance of the UP model, which has been seen as causing all this suffering. And these people in the streets are saying, no, the suffering was imposed to us during the dictatorship in ways that many people don't have any idea about. So it was very important. I just want to say, and I'm going to finish in 2 minutes, but the first ruling against political sexual violence from the dictatorship was made a few days ago. On August 24th, the Supreme Court confirmed that, yes, there was sexual human rights violations during the dictatorship. So this is also something that contributes to say, well, this is a terrible inheritance that we have to get rid of. Yeah. So, of course, now we are in front of a great contradiction because the results from the October 2020 referendum were showing that people wanted a new constitution, and they wanted a constitution that would be written by people, not by elected members of parliament. And of course, we all know that the constitution that was written was finally rejected. There was a huge backlash from the right-wing forces and also a disinformation campaign. But however, I think that as Carla said, we don't always have linear effects of social movements. And I think it is very important to see that human rights are still battlefields. This is another book, sorry for the publicity. Might as well tell you about it. But human rights are still battlefields in Latin America and in Chile, especially. And I think that a decade of mobilizations has succeeded in shedding light on authoritarian discursive aspect that legitimize present state violence through the exclusion of conflict. Social conflict is continuously depicted as violence. We can see that in the right-wing discourses. You know, in the last days, we have seen it very clearly. But we have been seeing in the last few weeks numerous groundbreaking rulings from the Supreme Court with the trial for Victor Jara, trial for political violence, and other very important cases, extrajudicial killings. And so this is quite interesting because in my view, and I'd like to discuss this with you, these important changes that we are seeing socially, both socially, the protests against impunity and the progress made in the judicial system in Chile, again, for past human rights violations, maybe explain the ferocity of the right-wing sectors, which they have expressed in their renewed accusation of how left-wing sectors were the one responsible, again, for the military dictatorship. These are the recent things that we saw from these people in the midst of the celebrations. So to finish, I think that this is, of course, based on many fieldwork trips to Chile, the last one being in December 2022. Social and cultural transformations stemming from a decade of movements remain. They will remain, and they are right now challenging racism and injustice. And here there's a wink to the Arpillera, which is a form of popular art that Violeta Parra has, of course, made known outside of Chile. But here you can see immigrants, the little people there which are building collective kitchen are immigrants, they're Black people. So this is a way of saying that popular sectors are still fighting for justice and against the racism in Chile. I hope we can hear more from them in the next years. Thank you very much for your attention.